If I were to sit down with you right now and tell you a story from Celtic mythology, and upon concluding it, you were to look at me and say, "But Mads, my grandfather told me that story when I was younger, and he said it actually ended this way, and it was a completely different ending from the one that I'd told you," technically, your grandfather would be correct, and so would I. Because you see, mythology stems obviously from pagan roots, and paganism traditionally was passed down orally. Most people didn't know how to write back when these myths were coming to be, and once people were able to write them down, they were generally written down by Christian monks, at least in the West anyway. And because these monks upheld Christian values, they wanted to preserve these old stories for historical record, but they also wanted to Christianize them to make sure that everyone would, get to heaven and all that. So unfortunately, these myths were Christianized by the monks who were writing them down, which means that they gave them Christian values. Obviously, since paganism is not rooted in Christianity, paganism doesn't have Christian values. So there is no strong sense of black or white, good and evil. Everything's kind of a moral gray area in paganism because deities are very much like human beings. They're just powerful human beings who can use magic and who live a lot longer than us. So you don't have stories in true paganism where like Loki just decides to get bored and commit mass genocide for literally no reason. You don't have a being like the Morrigan being nothing more than a terrifying harbinger of death and nothing else. There are no, static deities in paganism. Everyone is a little bit of everything. Now, why am I discussing mythology in this video? Well, mythology is a strong and integral part of world history, and throughout history, different religious beliefs have caused basically everything we know of to happen, good and bad. It's the reason we have a lot of beautiful architecture from centuries ago and certain castles, and it's the reason why a lot of beautiful artwork was created. There's a lot of good that's come from it, just as much as there's bad that's come from it. And with conquering of nations and people spreading their religion far and wide, there was a lot of appropriation. Now, unfortunately, in our modern era, the word appropriation has taken on a very negative connotation, and that's understandable from our point of view currently, because words tend to shift meaning somewhat over time, and right now, in the year 2021, the word appropriation has come to generally means something along the lines of you're from one culture and you're stealing something from another culture and claiming it as your own. But that's not what that word always meant. Appropriation happened in every single country for a very long time because you would have one branch of paganism invading a country from another branch of paganism, and they would kind of appropriate some of the customs and maybe the ceremonies and even the look sometimes of the people they had conquered, and the ones who were conquered would likewise appropriate some of the culture of the conquerors, which was kind of inevitable since they took over that land. And this happened over centuries and centuries, and it's why you have so many cross-cultural type customs or looks or belief systems in some cases because of appropriation. Now, obviously, it's not great that different people were invading each other and taking over each other's lands and everything. That's kind of sad, but it's a part of our history. But there is a positive spin to it, which is the fact that you have all these beautiful merges of different cultures and people kind of borrowing from one another and learning from one another. Now, that brings me to today's topic. I know it took me 5 minutes to get there, but I promise we're there now. which is the fact that there are a lot of people, now that we have so much social media, and a lot of different generations are on social media these days and learning from one another, but unfortunately, teachable moments are not always what people wish they were. Most people just want to hear what makes them feel good. They don't necessarily want to hear the truth, especially if the truth is going to make them feel bad. So when you have people on TikTok and on YouTube and wherever else, Twitter and stuff, saying, well, listen, I'm glad you find this and this beautiful, but it actually came, from these really problematic roots, and then everyone gets all upset and offended, like, oh, you're trying to find something to be upset about, stop bringing things up and trying to cause a problem where there isn't one. But then they're drowning out the people who need to be heard. There's this fine line to walk when you are of privilege over someone else, where you should use your privilege to amplify their voice, but you shouldn't shout over that voice. And it's hard to strike that balance, which is why you need to communicate with the people you're trying to help and learn from. And in paganism and witchcraft, there is a big problem. I've seen it in real life, I've seen it on Twitter, I've seen it on YouTube and TikTok, and that is strong appropriation in people's craft. Now, like I said earlier in this video, inevitably, because of the fact that we all conquered one another and everything, and our mythology, our stories, and our customs were kind of rewritten to suit a Christian narrative, we have a lot of filling in the blanks to do when it comes to witchcraft and paganism, and that can make things kind of tricky. And unfortunately, none of us knows 100% what the original stories were, and none of us knows 100% how every single custom was done, how every ritual and ceremony was done. We have bits and pieces, and we fill in the blank based on how we feel in that moment and how we choose to practice our craft. But where it isn't really acceptable anymore is when we are taking from someone who is in some way disenfranchised. We're not crediting them in any way. We're kind of using something that we haven't been permitted to use. For example, this is something from my real life. This person is no longer in my life, but I knew someone for a little while who was kind of an eclectic pagan, I guess you'd call her, or an eclectic witch. So kind of borrow bits and pieces from different branches in order to find what worked for her. It's fine, absolutely nothing wrong with it. A lot of people are eclectic pagans or eclectic witches. But whenever she wanted to engage in darker magic, which I've discussed on this channel before, dark magic is not evil magic or bad magic. It is simply looking into shadow work, looking into the darker aspects of the self in order to learn from that and do better over time. Whenever she wanted to do something like that, she would claim she was practicing voodoo. She would reach out to voodoo figures. She would do what she considered a voodoo offering to them, and basically it was always for something bad, pretty much. It was always an offering that involved harming herself or somebody else. It was an offering that was for something very selfish or for something that was potentially going to hurt someone that had wronged her, at least in her perception. And what was wrong with that, which I explained to her, was that several, not all, it's never every single person, but several people in New Orleans who have practiced voodoo for a very long time. It's been in their family for generations and generations, and it's been an integral part of who they are as a person, have said, listen, I get that like Hollywood has turned this into some glamorized or like spooky thing, but it's more than that. Voodoo is something that has very sad and terrible roots. It's like one of the few things that slaves got to hold on to after they were brought here against their will, enslaved by white people. They managed to hold on to some of their religious practices, and it's something very dear to them. And many of them, any of them that I have spoken to anyway, or heard from, listened to, watched, what have you, have said they'd strongly prefer that white people stay out of voodoo because, one, we don't really know how to use it properly and can hurt ourselves or others, and two, we have no business using it because it's just one more thing that we would be stealing from them. Now, upon hearing that, I thought, okay, there's plenty of other branches of paganism or of witchcraft that I can utilize, and I'm happy to utilize those instead. Like, I understand completely why they wouldn't want us nosing around in that. And when I told this person that, her reaction, instead of going, oh geez, I had no idea, like, I'll stop, was to go on this tirade about how everyone's so triggered these days and you can't do anything without upsetting people and it's not that serious and I'll practice whatever I want. And this doesn't only involve voodoo. This happens across several different branches of witchcraft or paganism. You see it with the smudge issue online a lot, where several different branches of witchcraft throughout all the centuries have used air or smoke to cleanse their space. It's just, it's something that was available very easily back then. So a lot of people used smoke from fire, or they would use some kind of herbal blend that they would, set alight and use the smoke. And that's okay, but when you call it smudge, it isn't very acceptable because that is an Indigenous American word. The white sage is what they have used for generations to cleanse their space and to participate in their cultural and religious ceremonies, and smudge is their word for it. And once again, just like the voodoo, this is just another thing that we're trying to take away from them when we've already taken away enough, and I can see why they get really frustrated and angry about this. And I think that the biggest problem to come out of all this, the discussion itself, not the act itself, is the fact that when a white person who practices witchcraft or paganism hears someone from a minority group say, hey, listen, it's fine if you're a witch, it's fine if you're doing, this kind of magic or that kind of magic, or you're cleansing this way or that way, but could you not call it this? Could you not practice this exact branch? White people tend to get really upset, their feathers get really ruffled, and they're like, well, you're telling me what I can and can't do, and this is my path. It chose me, I chose it. You don't get to dictate what I do and what I don't do. But no one is trying to dictate your entire existence. They're just trying to tell you, listen, this is one of the tiny scraps of my culture that I have left in this world, and I'd like to actually keep it if you don't mind. Can you please just, stay in your lane and practice one of the several branches we have? We have several different Slavic branches, we have several different Western European branches and stuff. Like, we have more than enough branches of witchcraft and paganism that we could draw from without stomping on anybody else. And I think that it isn't what we claim it is. I think it has little to nothing to do with just getting upset that someone is encroaching on what we deem our individual spiritual path, and more to do with just being mad that someone forced us to look into a mirror and see our privilege. We don't want to admit we have it. I see so many people who are white and who are witches on Twitter going on multi-tweet angry rants about how Christians are always, getting in our face, Christian this, Christian that, Christians just, are here to ruin our lives and cause all these problems for us, and here's all the ways that Christians have upset or hurt me in my past. Well, you know how Christians sometimes upset you and make you feel like you're not allowed to have just this one thing that is a very strong part of who you are as a person and a very strong part of your life as a whole? Well, take that and amplify it by like 100%, and you've got how you're making the people that you're arguing with feel. You can still cleanse with smoke and not use white sage, or purchase the white sage from someone who is Indigenous American. You can still cleanse with smoke and use a different blend of herbs to do it. You can still cleanse with smoke or with sage and not call it smudging, call it cleansing instead. And it's a work in progress. We're all learning from each other still. We all make mistakes. It doesn't make us bad, it just makes us human. It's okay to make mistakes if you actually want to learn from them and to do better to help those around you. And it's frustrating for me seeing people unwilling to do that, unwilling to meet people halfway. You don't need to do voodoo. Especially if you're eclectic, which you have no excuse at all if you're eclectic, because again, you have so much you could draw from instead. If someone tells you, please don't practice this way, it hurts me, you're gonna maybe have your feelings hurt, you might have your feathers ruffled, you'll be upset for, a week or so, or on and off here and there, but it's not gonna hurt you. But you know what is hurtful, and you know what is actually dangerous? It's taking what little is left behind when we've already taken enough as a race. So the next time someone tells you, hey, the way you're practicing isn't really okay, it has this problematic root in this and this, can you do this instead? Try to just say nothing. Even if your first reaction is to be frustrated with them for telling you what to do, instead just take a minute to listen to what they have to say to you. Don't argue with them, just apologize and ask, well, okay, what would you prefer I do to engage in my shadow work? What would you prefer that I call my, smoke cleansing? Just ask questions, learn from them, stop arguing, and deciding that you know better than somebody else. And that's pretty much all I got today. It's just something that's really been heavy on my mind lately, and I felt like it was really important to discuss it because of the fact that we are slowly starting to make tiny inches in the right direction now in this country, but we're gonna take one step forward and 2 steps back forever if we don't start listening to each other instead of shouting over each other. So that's all I've got for today. As usual, do something that makes you happy today, no matter what anyone else thinks about it, as long as you're not hurting anybody. And I'll see all of you again soon.